Hey guys, welcome back to Ace Recaps. Today I'm going to be explaining a 2019 sci-fi mystery film titled Synchronic. The story revolves around a designer drug that when taken, teleports people to the past. Most humans can come back in a few minutes, whereas some are stuck there. A man suffering from cancer tries his best to figure out a way to bring back his best friend's daughter. Will he succeed? Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. A young couple lies in bed at a hotel, preparing to take a designer drug called Synchronic, expecting to have some fun. They take the pill and wait a few moments. The man then takes the elevator to the lobby, leaving the woman in bed to wait for the drug to take effect. Soon after, the woman notices shrubs and plants in the room. The man finds the elevator to not be working properly and notices the walls dissolving in front of him, revealing a desert desolation. The woman notices the walls around her gradually slipping away, and a strange tribal-looking man appears through in front of her. The floor of the lift vanishes, and the man falls onto the sand. The woman is likewise in the middle of a deep jungle, and the odd man approaches her. She screams when she sees a snake crawling towards her. Steve and Dennis, long-standing best friends who work as emergency medical technicians in New Orleans, respond to a drug overdose. They find the house and discover two people on the floor. Dennis attends to the bleeding man, confirming his survival and doing the necessary medical operation. Steve is tending to an overdose sufferer when he is pricked by a syringe. He injects the female, and she immediately awakens. Dennis discovers that the man was pierced through the back, revealing a bleeding exit wound. When the cops arrive, they discover a synchronic wrapper and determine that the scenario is merely the product of addicts assaulting each other. Steve picks up a copper coin from the floor. The officers discover a bloody sword attached to a wall as Steve and Dennis transport the bleeding man to the ambulance. Steve and Dennis afterwards take a break, and they play golf. He inspects the coin he discovered and notices a date imprinted on it, 1721. Steve was later tested for HIV, afraid that the needle poke had contaminated him. The doctor suggests that he get a full medical checkup, which he will consider the next day. Dennis and Steve are at a family picnic to celebrate Dennis's daughter's birthday. Steve notices Dennis's daughter, Brianna, sitting alone on a tiny boulder and chooses to approach her. Dennis claims Brianna has always felt a connection with Steve, who she regards as the cool uncle. Brianna tries to tell Steve how she feels, but she is interrupted by a phone call. Dennis and Steve arrive at another horrific site where someone has been burned to death. Officers advise the couple that there is no other evidence of fire nearby, thus they are unknown how the person perished. They do, however, discover an empty synchronic wrapper and a melted doorknob out of position. Steve later undergoes a brain scan at the hospital and learns that he has a tumor. Dennis and Steve then respond to the last couple that took Synchronic in a hotel. The woman, who has a snake bite on her knee, is in shock and only mumbles her boyfriend's name. They discover another synchronic packet on the scene, and animal control workers inform them that they have searched for the snake but have come up empty-handed. He also informs them that he recognizes the snake bite, which could only have originated from a snake not seen in the area in decades. Steve then notices a bag from a vaporizer shop, from which the victim obtained this synchronic. Dennis goes to investigate when the hotel caretaker reports hearing a loud crash from the lift shaft. When he opens the lift doors, he discovers the woman's lover dead at the bottom of the shaft, his face filled with euphoria. Dennis notices Steve using pills more regularly on their route to the hospital. At the hospital, a doctor tells him that the tumor is malignant, aggressive, and damages his pineal gland. Depending on how he responds to the medication and counseling, he could live for as little as 6 weeks or as long as many decades. Later, Steve considers informing Dennis of the news, but decides against it. Dennis tries to bond with Brianna by playing basketball with her. He is concerned that he has become aloof as a father and is anxious for Brianna's well-being. Brianna assures her father that she's not going through anything bad. She's just anxious about not knowing what to do with her life. She'll be starting college shortly, and she's not sure if the path she's chosen is the best one for her. Dennis gives Steve a science-themed desk lamp as a birthday present in a pub. Dennis then shares his concerns regarding his marriage. He's still not sure if he wants to be a family man. When he sees Steve's lifestyle, he can't help but be envious of the bachelor's life. Dennis confronts Steve about all of the medicines he's been taking, fearing that he'll develop a morphine addiction. Steve tells him that the pills are for his headaches and swears to take care of himself. The following day, the pair arrives at a house party where they are responding to an overdose report. They find one teenager lifeless on the floor and another speaking incoherently. They ask her if there are others, and she says a girl named Brianna was with her. Dennis is terrified upon hearing his daughter's name. He calls his wife right away, and she informs him that Brianna is not at home. He finally admits that his daughter has gone missing, now that someone close to him has succumbed to Synchronic. Steve decides to go to the Synchronic vape shop and buy all of the remaining packets. A man observes him purchasing the Synchronic and then follows him to his car. The man approaches Steve and offers to buy the Synchronic from him for far more than the store's asking price. Steve urges the man to get away from the car and drives away. Dennis and his wife are busy phoning authorities and producing flyers for Brianna at their home. His wife is upset because she believes they are not doing enough. That night when Steve is sleeping in bed with his dog, Hawking, he hears a commotion coming from the living room. He grabs a bat and goes in search of answers. He opens the cupboard and discovers the vape store owner. Steve tries to beat him, but the man begs him not to and informs him that he created Synchronic. He introduces himself as Dr. Connie, a chemist, reveals that he has been attempting to repurchase all of the Synchronic sold around the country. He explains that he creates synthetic drugs by altering the molecular structure of legal prescriptions to create something that resembles illegal substances. Synchronic was supposed to be a simple hallucinogenic, but he accidentally made a drug that allows people to travel through time. Synchronic distorts the fabric of space-time, allowing people to cross over to different periods. This drug has the most significant impact on a person's pineal gland. He elaborates, adults with a mature pineal gland can only appear as shadows or ghosts in the past, whereas younger persons with an underdeveloped pineal gland can travel completely and even become trapped in another time period. Connie spent his time searching down all the Synchronic in order to destroy them, with the vape shop being his final visit. Steve informs him that he flushed the drug and orders Connie to go. Connie agrees, believing the Synchronic have been eradicated, but it is discovered that Steve did not flush the drug, but rather tossed them away. He goes to his chemotherapy appointment the next day. When he finishes, he instantly feels the adverse effects and begins vomiting at work at random and is constantly fatigued. Dennis receives a call from the hospital notifying him that morphine has gone missing. He accuses Steve first because he is unaware of his chemotherapy and notices him taking more pills. They soon get another call about a man with a broken leg and head to the location. They find the victim but are unable to communicate because he speaks a different language. They begin treating the man, and Dennis begins instructing his partner, but Steve gets irritated, claiming that he understands how to do his job, but Dennis responds that he doesn't, insinuating that he arrived at work high on morphine. As they leave, they have an argument. Dennis refers to Steve as a man-child, and Steve criticizes Dennis for always complaining about his life, even when there is nothing to complain about. They start punching each other, but the ambulance driver breaks them up. Steve departs, returning home alone. That night, he analyzes the coin he found at the crime site and considers using the Synchronic. After a few moments, bright lights flood his living room. He turns and sees a swamp slowly appearing around him, his living room walls slowly disappearing. His living room disappears entirely, and he's left in a swamp. He looks around, smelling and touching everything in disbelief of what he's seeing. A man stalks him from a distance, muttering a prayer. Steve then sees a crocodile approaching him, and he backs away, also seeing that he's starting to disappear. The stalker reveals himself to be a Spanish conqueror, and he charges towards the man. Steve is afraid, trapped between a ravenous crocodile and a lunatic with a sword. Steve reappears in his living room just as the Spaniard draws his sword down on him, with Hawking staring at him. He almost dismisses what happened as a dream out of curiosity until he notices a slash mark on the floor from the conquistador's sword. Steve decides to film his encounter and narrates that the pill permits him to travel back in time for 7 minutes. He suspects that Brianna experienced the same thing. He swallows another pill and gradually fades away. He reappears in the middle of a cold landscape and begins to freeze. He sees a silhouette approaching him, but he collapses from the cold. 7 minutes pass, and he reappears in his living room, shivering. He realizes that his arrival time is determined by his position in the living room. He tries again, this time dressed warmly and bringing firewood. He returns to the icy landscape and manages to build a fire. A person approaches, holding a spear. As the person gets closer, Steve notices that it is a caveman. The caveman lowers his spear when he touches it. Steve gives the man a seat, and they sit opposite each other. Steve gradually returns to the present, seeing that the caveman, who was most likely younger than him, appears decades older with his triumphant return to the Ice Age. He confirms that the period he arrives in is determined by where he stands. The next morning, Dennis and his wife are having further problems with their marriage, and Brianna's disappearance is putting a strain on their relationship. Steve hears from the radio that Dr. Connie had committed suicide that night. He thinks about the copper coin, the sword, and the doorknob, the three things that the paramedics found with the victims. He tries to experiment, hoping to transport Hawking back in time. He intends to take Synchronic, and when he begins to fade, he decides to hold on to Hawking. He is successful in transporting Hawking with him. Unfortunately, they arrive at a time when the majority of the population still faces racial persecution. They appear at a house and are chased away by a guy. Steve and Hawking flee, but notice that everyone in town is staring at them. This time, he does not vanish after 7 minutes. He decides to return to the house where he and Hawking appeared. Steve takes another pill, and they sneak back in, but the man discovers them. The man summons his buddies, who come in white drapes. In the living room, chaos ensues, and Steve is separated from Hawking. He emerges in his living room before the men can shoot him. He hears Hawking whimpering and rushes to the window to witness his best friend slowly fade away. Steve then makes 2 additional discoveries. First, if you are not at the location where you first appeared after 7 minutes, you will be stuck in the time you went to. Second, anything you bring with you, whether from the past or the present, should be hugged securely. Steve then returns to the university residence, where they found Brianna missing. Steve attempts to travel to the exact site where one of the youngsters reported they saw Brianna seated before disappearing. He ends up in the middle of a forest, where many guys are performing a ceremony and mistake him for a summoned demon. They run after him, and Steve flees back to the tree from which he came. Fortunately, he was able to grab onto the lawn chair and be transported back to his timeline. The teenager who told him about Brianna reappears and explains that when Brianna had gone missing, she didn't actually vanish from that location. Later, Steve meets Dennis at a pub and they converse. Dennis informs Steve that he is considering divorce. He feels guilty for failing to keep the commitment he made to his wife on their wedding day. She's loved him unconditionally, and he feels guilty for he hasn't been returning the love. He says that Brianna was the only one keeping their marriage afloat, and now that she's gone, he feels that nothing is holding them together. Steve then tells him that he would gladly trade his single life for Dennis' stable married one in an instant. Dennis is surprised to learn that he envies his way of life. The truth about Steve's brain tumor is then finally revealed. Dennis is absolutely surprised and stunned. Steve seeks to console Dennis after receiving the news by informing him that he has been undergoing chemotherapy. Dennis admits that their ambulance driver stole the morphine at the cemetery, and the two reconcile. He then shows Dennis video evidence of Synchronic's effects. Dennis is afraid rather than amazed to learn that Brianna has been sent back in time. Dennis then realizes Brianna may have left them a message to decipher. In the present, Steve remembers a small boulder at a local park where Brianna had been sitting earlier. On the stone is the word, always. Steve concludes that this could have been Brianna's location when she was transported. With only 2 tablets remaining, Steve takes the Synchronic and is transported to the American Civil War. The sound of bombs and gunshots fills the air, and Steve runs to a bunker, where he discovers a mass grave of dead troops. He crawls across piles of dead bodies, screaming out to Brianna, until he eventually hears her calling to him. Brianna is relieved to see her uncle Steve come to her aid. He gives Brianna the last tablet, which she consumes. He tells her that they have 7 minutes to reach the boulder or they will be locked in the past forever. They make a break for the boulder, but Steve has been shot, and Brianna helps him across. A random soldier appears, holding them at bay and calling Steve a slave. The 7 minutes are up, and he's now trapped in the past. He's now solely concerned with returning Brianna to the present. Steve notices a mine in front of the soldier and attempts to entice him to tread on it. However, the soldier steps over it and prepares to shoot Steve. Brianna vanishes, and a huge explosion shakes Steve and the soldier. The soldier loses his balance and steps on the landmine, which explodes and kills him. Steve stands up and sits on the boulder. Brianna reappears in the present, and Dennis hugs her. Steve then appears ghostly atop the boulder before vanishing into nothingness, trapped in the past forever. That's all, folks. Thank you for watching. If you like the video, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.